And so it begins tonight. Good evening, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee here on this Thursday, the 14th of February, Valentine's Day 2019. And big hearts go out to all of you that are watching tonight and have joined the live stream. We've had a pretty decent day here in my neck of the woods. Some sunshine, some patchy clouds, and now we're transitioning over to some milder air for Friday. Meanwhile, out in the west, it's just out of control. The deep trough, the extreme nature. If we go back a few days ago, we were talking about the extreme nature of the Pacific North America Index and how off the wall it was. Well, guess what? It has really created some incredibly crazy weather, actually, in the west, where it's just been unrelenting. Either it's been the heavy snows being seen in places like Seattle, for example, and the almost continuous, it seems, winter storm warnings that are up in the west, to incredible rainfalls, particularly in Southern California, of several to many inches. You had a 76-year record in Palm Springs broken with multiple inches of rain falling there, and that is going to continue. And guess what? There's more to come. So we're going to talk also about the long range, because there's a lot of conversation going on, a lot of chatter with regards to the long range, and I thought this would be a good night to kind of look at where things are at this point. We're halfway through the month of February, and for you snow lovers, you're running in the I-95 corridor anyway. You're running out of time, and you're running out of time in a big way, at least from the standpoint of how this winter has played itself out. It doesn't mean that there still can't be some chances. There's certainly a possibility that we could weave in a break in this overall pattern at some point, but also at some point the calendar catches up. And this is not like last year, where we had that mega blocking pattern developing. It was already starting to show its signs now. It took a couple of weeks for it to gradually gain a foothold, but the hints were there on the weather models, and they're not quite there on the weather models today. So we're going to take a look at all of that, and let's get started. Okay, by the way, it's a new look because they moved the computer over, and I'm hoping that the sound is okay. I tested it before. It seemed to be sounding as it usually does. There's a bit of a tinniness to the sound from here. That's something I really can't help. But as long as you guys can hear me, we're in good shape. And I'm looking at the chat, and I'm not seeing anyone saying that they can't hear me, so that's a good thing. All right, let's get started. First off, the watches and warnings map, which it's been a while. We occasionally get those breaks, even in the wintertime, where you get a day where there really isn't much in terms of watches and warnings. That is not one of those days today. We've got winter weather advisories up in the Central Plains. Now, this is going to be for some of that that western energy. With all the troughing in the west, that energy's got to go someplace, and we're going to see it get kicked to the East Coast piece after piece after piece, probably through all of next week. And the first three pieces are going to come into play between now and next Wednesday into early Thursday. Meanwhile, in the west, we have winter weather advisories and some winter storm warnings up for interior Washington. Not much going on at the coast at the moment. There's more rain than anything else on the radar that is coming in. But to the south, in northwestern California, southwestern Oregon, we've got winter storm warnings up, as well as up and down the Sierra Nevadas. A lot of wind advisories, the flood watches and flood advisories and flood warnings, that are up in Southern California and in through a good chunk of the state of Arizona. Those continue as well. We've got advisories and winter storm warnings up for parts of western Colorado, the mountains in Utah, on up through western Wyoming, parts of Idaho and into a small portion of southwestern Montana. And then advisories everywhere else in the state of Montana. Some advisories up also for the eastern Dakotas and westernmost Minnesota down into northern Iowa. Not too much happening in the east. Some residual winter weather advisories up in northern Maine as the system from 2 days ago finally begins to pull away and the upper low begins to pull away, so the snows there should start to relax. And we have some localized lake effect going on in northern Michigan with some winter weather advisories and a few winter storm warnings up over in that region. The Weather Prediction Center has its look at things with regards to rainfall, liquid precip, I should say, over the next 7 days. So we'll take a look at that. I always think this is a good map to look at because it helps you at least, gives you a good setup of where the weather pattern is going between now and next Thursday evening. Notice if you look at where the heavy rains are out in the west, this is just a kind of eyeball it here how the upper air pattern is, but the extent of the rainfall running from northern Washington, from northwestern Washington, all the way down to southern California and into the southwest is a signature here of the deep trough. Picture that, the trough on the upper air map, and you could just picture that big, deep dip that goes down into the west. Then the bottom of that trough turns, and you get a west-southwest flow across the Gulf states into the lower Tennessee Valley and through the mid-Atlantic states and out. So that's pretty much where your flow is here. And in the meantime, when you look up to the north, you'll notice that the rainfall amounts, the green is half an inch. So from once you get north of central New Jersey northward, you're looking at liquid precip amounts of half an inch or less. So it's kind of telling you here what exactly is happening in the upper air as far as where the heaviest precip is. You can figure out where the troughs and to a certain extent the ridge that is in the eastern part of the United States. So we'll now move on to the current weather, and then we're going to talk about the long range after that. So let's take a look at what's happening right now as of 7:16 Eastern Time. And we're going to start with, we'll bring us up full screen, and we'll start with the radar tonight. The radar is pretty busy out in the west, no question. There's quite a bit of rain in Southern California. I'll go close up here on a zoom. And you can see the heavy rains that are falling in and around the San Diego area. They've moved to the east now of Los Angeles, but they extend northeastward into southern Nevada and on up through much of Arizona, just getting clobbered with heavy rain out of this. And that rain, by the way, also extends into parts of New Mexico. We'll move up the coast, and there's a surge of rain getting ready to move into northwestern California. Now, this area is cold, so they're in the heart of that trough. They're going to wind up with some heavy snows. I was looking at some of the forecasts for northwestern California. The snow levels are actually forecast to drop down to 1,000 feet, and that you might see some heavy snows accumulate even in areas closer to the valleys, the valley floors, which don't often see the snow that you usually get into elevations of 2,500 feet, 3,500 feet or higher. This is going to go down all the way to 1,000 feet. And up to the north, a bit of maybe a temporary respite as far as the cold air that's in western Washington, and we're seeing some heavy rains moving through that region at the moment. In the Great Lakes, the snow showers here getting some action. You got a cold front that's swinging on through. There's probably going to be a little bit of lake effect going on after that, after the front goes by. In the northeast, it's pretty quiet. The snows are done in Maine, so I think those winter weather advisories are perhaps preemptive for the next weather system that'll be coming through there, and that is going to be for tomorrow and tomorrow night. So the forecast as far as snow is concerned, this is through Saturday as the map loads. Let me make sure you guys can see this okay. I want to always make sure this is centered and you see the date here. This is through Sunday the 17th. still in the process of loading, but the amounts are on the order of basically a couple of inches, nothing overly exceptional here. And I'm going to widen out just a little bit. There you go. In northern Maine, some 5 and 6 inch amounts. Now, across from the Central Plains through the Middle Mississippi Valley, down through the Lower Ohio Valley, through West Virginia and into Virginia, and maybe even into the southern counties of New Jersey, this is going to be one of the first of those western pieces coming out, producing mainly a coating to a couple of inches. Some of the mountains in eastern West Virginia, you got a 4 print over here, so there might be a few areas that see a little bit more of a bullish outcome. Around the Great Lakes, we're looking at 1 to 2, 1 to 3 inches as you go back through Iowa and in through Minnesota, and some bigger amounts in the upper peninsula of Michigan and in the northernmost part of the lower peninsula. And then we'll widen this out so you can take a look at the extent of the snow. Again, this is just through Saturday out in the west. It is pretty extensive indeed, although the heavy snows, at least through Saturday, have shifted away from western Washington and parts of western Oregon, and now have moved down into the mountains of northwestern northwestern California, down through the Sierra Nevadas, and also the snaking snows that run up the Rockies. By the way, the I-95 corridor has been in a snow hole. Well, so has areas in eastern Colorado, particularly in Denver, where they have not seen much, if any, snow this winter so far. And they are on a spot here where they're kind of on the edge of some of this heavier snow that is coming eastward. I didn't specifically check their weather service forecast. We'll have to give that a look to see if Denver is about to get a break in its snow drought. On the surface map tonight, as we look at the 4 o'clock surface map, 21Z, we've got a new cold front that is heading into the east. There's not a whole lot with this. North and west of the low center getting some snows, and of course another cold high coming down into the Dakotas and in through Minnesota. The trough axis is in a position where this area, it keeps getting cold air mass after cold air mass coming down, and that is going to continue until further notice. And meanwhile, here in the east, high pressure is moving out, and we're beginning a southwest flow. This front has not much with it. The Gulf of Mexico is not really open here. They have warmed up today. I talked to one of my friends down in Florida who was complaining about the fact that temperatures yesterday were in the low to mid 60s in Jacksonville, and they have edged up a bit today into the middle and upper 60s, and you start seeing a return to some temperatures in the 70s, dew points in the 50s, which is nice. And you get into Georgia, South Carolina, really nice weather here. Temperatures nice and dry. Temperatures in the low and mid 60s, and dew points in the 20s and low 30s. So this is really nice dry air. 70s back into southeast Louisiana with dew points in the 50s. That's always a good thing. And then, of course, in the west, you've got the latest low that has moved into eastern Oregon, and then there's another strong low sitting off the coast of Vancouver and Vancouver, British Columbia, and off the coast east of Seattle. That low is going to be dropping southeastward with more weather moving into the west. Busy times in the western part of the United States. Okay, I had the temperature map I wanted to show you, but I guess it reset itself, so we'll move on from there and take a look at where we're going in the short range. So here we have the latest GFS run. A lot of that rain and heavy snow in the west. Energy continues to come in. Here's another low Friday night coming into the southwestern Oregon, northern California. And meanwhile, in the east, you've got a cold front coming through. Now, the system that's moved in now is going to move very quickly east of the Rockies, and you can see there's snow that drops down into Kansas, western Missouri, a little bit of ice there in northeastern Colorado and northwestern Arkansas. That low moves eastward. This is going to produce maybe a coating to a couple of inches of snow in St. Louis, into southern Illinois, and in through Kentucky. Now, the front in the east, when it comes through tomorrow, again, as I said, other than a passing shower or two, shouldn't be much with it. But that first energy is going to move off the coast on Saturday, off the North Carolina coast. There's no mechanism to turn it northward. Okay, it's just basically sliding east, staying weak. The upper air in the east is basically a ridge position. So as a result, you really aren't going to see much of any strengthening. This is very similar to what we've seen over the last couple of weeks with these weather systems. The two phrases I always come back to is the trend is your friend, and the other one is that while history never repeats itself exactly, it does tend to rhyme. And I think what we're seeing here is a situation of the pattern basically rhyming, where you get these lead weak systems that come out and move off the coast, and then they set up a slightly bigger system. We had something like that on Tuesday, and I think we're about to see this process all over again. So this first piece comes out, and now you've got the next round of western energy that gets kicked along, and this is for Saturday night into Sunday. It's a little colder at this point in the plains and in the central plains, with a low in central Colorado. In central Oklahoma. So you're going to see there's a little bit more to this system as far as energy is concerned. We see snow breaking out through Iowa, in through Nebraska, northeastern Kansas, northern Missouri. The low goes very close to St. Louis and pushes eastward. Now, when this moves east on Sunday, it's going to have a little bit more moisture to play with. But again, I want to emphasize the word little here, okay? Because we still don't have good inflow from the Gulf or from the Atlantic. And by the way, in the meantime, this particular piece does bring a little respite there out in the west on later Sunday night into Monday. So a bit of a break. This low is another instance of a low. It's a weak primary that goes along or just west of the Appalachians, and then you're going to get a little secondary that develops. I really am not overly enthused or bullish in terms of the amount of precip that this system is going to produce. I think it's going to be weak, and it's going to be on the light side, and there probably will be enough warming to bring the rain-snow line to about New York City and Long Island. If it's a weaker system, you'll probably have that rain-snow line a little further south. On the other hand, you will also, at the same time, have probably less in the way of precip to deal with. I think this is going to be minor. And then we wait for system number 3. And this is going to come out for Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, this setup for the middle of next week looks eerily similar to what we just went through. You are setting up with a cold high that's going to try to build up in upstate New York and into southeastern Canada. Low pressure is going to come out of the Gulf of Mexico here, and there's a little bit of a wedge that is building down into Virginia, cold air trying to dam east of the Appalachians, but it is not a very cold high here. It's cold, but perhaps not cold enough. But when you look at what the model is doing, and you look at what the pattern that we're in, it would suggest a primary low that goes west of the Appalachians, and a secondary low that's going to try and form, like the last time, near the North Carolina, Virginia coast. The secondary is going to be weak, so cold air is going to get trapped, but only for so long. And when you look at the precip, the way it sets up, it really does look like what we went through on Tuesday, with a burst of snow at the beginning, a change over to sleet, and then over to rain. And I kind of think that that's how it plays. It also looks to me like this system looks weaker on the models, on most of the models anyway. It looks weaker than what the Tuesday system was, but it has more to it than the first two that we're dealing with, the one Saturday and the one for Sunday night and Monday. Meanwhile, out in the west, you've got more snow coming into the northwest and dropping southward, but the pulses seem to be lessening a bit. And all that western energy being sent eastward, the GFS is responding to this, and the other models are, although they all are doing it a bit differently, with system after system basically coming 2 days apart. So the one pulls out on Thursday, only to be followed by another one for Friday. And again, it's the same idea. Not a whole lot of cold air here. A low that tries to go up west of the Appalachians, a primary that heads there into western Pennsylvania, and a bit of a secondary that develops off the coast. It's quite possible that the models might be missing the fact that one of these systems might wind up being stronger than is modeled at this time. It's going to depend on how much of the trough in the west tries to swing eastward, and that's a big question. You're also going to be under a ridge here in the eastern states, and the systems moving into that ridge position, are going to want these systems to come out weaker. We're now into day 8 or 9, so I think this is a pretty good time for me to switch off and explain what's happening here in the long range. We talked about the fact that the overall weather pattern last year at this time was giving some signs that, and we were in a very warm pattern here in the east last February. Much of the month we spent in a ridge position. It was a very warm month in the east. But there was a lot going on that suggested that we were going to go into some kind of blocking pattern in the Atlantic that was going to make for a big pattern change toward the end of the month of February. And indeed it did, and it wound up setting up into being a very dynamic month, the month of March, with 4 nor'easters, one after another after another. Well, the odds of that happening a second 2 years in a row are pretty low. If something's going to change, I don't think it's going to change in the same way. But the Pacific jet, and a few people have been kind of looking at all of this, and I guess a lot of snow lovers getting frustrated at the fact that we've got all these things going on with respect to certain weather patterns setting up. Why is it not? Is it the El Nino? Is it the lack of blocking? I've made the argument that I think on the list of things of where this is of potential issues, I think the blocking is really the least of it because of the fact that when you did have the blocking earlier this winter, it was too strong, or in one instance, it was weak, but it was the wrong kind of blocking, and it basically suppressed everything down to the south. Now, if you were in Virginia, North Carolina, you got a bonus snowstorm in December that set records, and then you got another pretty solid snowstorm in the month of January. So you guys actually have had a pretty decent winter from the standpoint of snow. Excuse me. But it's north of Baltimore, up to Boston, up to actually through Portland, Maine, because all the snowfall amounts, when you look at the snowfall amounts in the coastal cities like Portland, Boston, New York City, down to Philadelphia, you're seeing well below normal snowfalls for the season, but then they jump back above normal when you get down to Baltimore, Washington, and points of the south. But looking at this Pacific jet, it really is a mess. And you can see where the trough is set up. You've got a ridge that runs up into the Gulf of Alaska. You have that runs straight from Hawaii up to the Gulf of Alaska. You have a fire hose that runs from just south of Japan, about halfway across the Pacific. It gets deflected to some degree with a weak trough that is sitting to the west of Hawaii. But it's really not very good. This is just not a good pattern for the east. And of course, if you're going to have a deep trough in the west, you're going to have to offset that with strong ridges on either side. So you have a strong ridge in the Gulf of Alaska. You've got a strong ridge that's popping up off the southeast coast of the United States. And then, of course, the other issue being the problem in the Atlantic. And we've talked about the fact that there's been a lack of storm activity in the Atlantic. You would at least want to see a few storms out there where things kind of get jammed up a bit. Because then when weather systems are moving toward the East Coast, they have to find a way out. And if they can't move east, which is what they like to do, they're going to try and move more northeast or northward. And in this instance, when you have a jet like this in the Atlantic that's now going to be dominated by one deep trough in the north central Atlantic going all the way down along 40 degrees west, all that does, when you have this huge monster sitting out here, all that does is that it has to, there's going to be two corresponding strong ridges as a result. And you've got one off the Atlantic coast, off the southeast coast of the U.S., building northwestward. The axis of this ridge actually in this time frame is a little bit further to the east, which would be a small plus, except for the fact that as we roll through the upper air, you're going to see that this is going to try to do that as weather systems move through and then just go right back further west. But you've got this strong ridge off the southeast coast, and you've got this strong ridge again that's built up in Western Europe and on up toward England and Ireland. So that's got that big upper low trapped, and that means that it's no good. So here's the GFS, and I just kind of to illustrate what's happening with these weather systems. So you've got this first one, of course, for Saturday, moving along weak low off the North Carolina coast. You got that arrow pointing out, so it's just going to basically move out and done. The second system already, the second energy coming out of the west drops down into Colorado, and that is going to be forced to move eastward. And then we move to Monday, where that second system now has reached the east coast. This was a different model solution from earlier today, where you have a weak low in northern Maryland and a weak secondary that pops up in eastern North Carolina. Light precip. This would be the example of what I suggested earlier. If you wind up with a weaker, flatter system, you're going to have a colder look here, but at the same time, you're going to have less precip. So much of what you see in the snow area is definitely on the light side. I mean, if that were to work out, it would be epic snow showers and snow flurries, and maybe somebody gets a coating or perhaps somebody gets an inch out of it, but that would be about it. And then we jump to system number 3, which comes out, and you see I have the arrow drawn, that primary going up to northeast Ohio into southeastern Canada, the snaking warm front, that hairpin warm front, the isobars trying to wedge down, some cold air with this cold high northwest of Maine, trying to wedge down with some snow and then some sleet and then some rain. This really does look like that system back that we had on Tuesday. So that really goes to the idea of what I said with respect to things rhyming in the scheme of a weather pattern. You just get some repetition. What we're going to have, what snow lovers are going to have to hope for, is that while the overall pattern is not good, will we get occasional respites where the primary pattern relaxes, and that allows for something to come along and possibly do something. Well, we don't have all the of this view. We don't have all the maps in, but I want to just jump to, let's see if it's still okay, so this is one of the things I've noticed with the GFS is the fact that in its long range, it keeps trying to show a change in that 11 to 16 day time frame, but particularly in days 14, 15, and 16. And today's runs were really no different. It does orchestrate an upper air change, but the problem with this is that I've been seeing this on and off for the last week, and we never seem to get beyond the day 14, 15, 16. It's always in that last 3 days. So this look that you see, and at this point, by the way, we're at March 2nd, so bear that in mind. This look is a much better look, but for snow lovers, but it's got its problems as well, and we don't progress to this. It just the model takes us there, but we never seem to get there, or we never seem to get closer. So I'm not even going to put any value in this until we get closer. And here's another example, by the way, of the teleconnections. The last number of days, the Pacific North America Index, the state of that Pacific North America Index in that very deeply negative, off-the-wall negative reading, many standard deviations from the neutral line. This really is the reason why you're seeing all this extreme weather out in the West, and we are forecast to go even more extreme between the period of the 18th to the 22nd. Now, after the 22nd, rapid rise to the neutral line by the time we get to the last day of the month of February. What's the problem? The problem is that if you've been looking at these ensemble forecasts of these teleconnections, they've been showing this rapid ascent to the neutral line now also for a week, and we never seem to move it into a shorter time frame. It's always in the last 4 or 5 days. So until we actually see this rise, because this rise would signal a weakening of the trough in the west and maybe going into more of a ridge position in the west and more of a trough position in the east. But until we actually start to see this move into, this is the 14th. It doesn't really start rising until 9 days from now. When I start to see it rise 4 and 5 days from now, talk to me. But until then, we're going to just have to assume a continuity until proven otherwise. The NAO, neutral to slightly positive to slightly negative to slightly positive. It's really not a huge player here. And the EPO is, slightly negative to just south of the neutral line. Then it's a little positive, a little negative, a little positive, a little negative. So it's that PNA, that Pacific North America Index, measuring the pressure patterns in not just in the Pacific but also on the Atlantic side. And when it's deeply negative, it is telling you that we've got a deep trough in the west, a strong ridge in the east. When it's positive, we have the reverse: strong ridge in the west, and a deeper trough in the east. And also remember, by the way, that you can have all the teleconnections in your favor, and they don't mean a darn thing if the ridges and troughs are not in the right spot. And in fact, I'm going to come back up full screen and see if I can find this, because I did tweet about this. I did post this earlier today on my Patreon platform. I didn't tweet about it, but I posted this today on my Patreon platform as an example of why the teleconnections, just like all the other things that we look at, no one thing is a true signal of a forecast. No one thing is going to lead you to make a correct forecast. So let me just bring up this other view of the teleconnections. I might have done this yesterday. I don't quite remember, but if I did, I'm just going to repeat it because I think it's worth repeating. So let me bring it up to the screen again in case you missed it. So here's a look at those teleconnections going back before the winter started, going back to the middle of November. We have the Pacific North America Index at the bottom, the North Atlantic Oscillation Index in the middle, and the Arctic Oscillation, which is not on that teleconnection page, but the Arctic Oscillation. Higher pressures in the Arctic region mean colder air gets displaced southward, and lower pressures the opposite. And when the AO is negative, that's when you have higher pressures in the Arctic region displacing that cold air southward. And you'll notice that through January, we kind of went up and down, negative to neutral, back to negative, and then strongly negative. So these two negative spikes here, when we saw those two strong pushes of cold air, and specific when the vortex dropped down into the Great Lakes, that was the second spike. Hang on one second, folks. They seem to be falling apart here. Hang on. I just got to check something. All right. I'm knocking things off left and right until I get used to this new chair. Okay, so notice that Arctic oscillation took a big spike positive back after the first week of February. That was when we had, that cold air, when that vortex pulled out and we warmed up and rained. And we've been in a positive AO ever since. And the red lines are actually forecasts. And you'll notice that the AO supposedly is forecast to drop to neutral and down to negative as we get toward the end of the month. We'll see. The North Atlantic oscillation, going back to the beginning of the winter, we had it positive to, negative in November, because we did have that, what happened in November, around the 15th, of course. So we had it negative in November, then went positive, and then kind of straddled the neutral line for a good chunk of the second half of December. Slightly negative going to early January, slightly positive going through January, straddled the neutral line, and it continues to do so. And the Pacific North America Index, the PNA, was positive in November, kind of went to flat line, then it's been mostly positive. So when you look at these indices, if you were to look at them at face value, you'd say, well, you know what, the teleconnections really weren't that bad. How come we didn't have a more didn't we have, why is the winter turning out the way it is? And the answer is because it ain't all about the teleconnections, folks. There is you've got the Pacific Jet. I think of all the players, the Pacific Jet is really the one. That is the one most important thing. When the Pacific Jet is a mess, like it's been, it's not good for snows in the coastal cities in the Northeast. A number of people have been jumping on, the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is the wind oscillations that occur in the tropical regions as you get into the West Pacific and into the Indian Ocean. Well, and supposedly in the phases that they're in, there's 8 phases that have been identified. 8, 1, and 2 are very favorable for cold and snowier weather in the eastern part of the United States. Although remember, I said the eastern part of the United States. I'm not saying where in the east, but that supposedly, and I don't follow that one very closely. If somebody talks about it, that's how it comes into my mind. But it's supposedly in phase 8 right now, which is supposed to be very positive. Well, why is it not translating? Well, it could be because the what's going on in that part of the world is not connecting with the Pacific Jet. It's not changing. It's remaining its own, basically doing its thing on its own and not connecting across the Pacific. Its impact is not rippling across the Pacific. We're not getting a feedback in order to get that, in order to change that jet in the Pacific. So, you've got gears out there that are sort of spinning on their own, and they're not turning with each other. One is not creating a change in the one ahead of it, and changed in the one ahead of that, and on and on and on. They all just seem to be operating independently of each other at the moment, and sometimes that happens. There's not much you can do about it. You just have to kind of sit back and wait to see where the pattern ultimately takes you. So the bottom line is, at least for the next 10 days to 2 weeks, I really don't see anything of consequence unless something sneaks in. If you get maybe a little more low-level cold air with that system for the middle of next week, and you wind up with a repeat performance of what we had Tuesday. Maybe there's a bit more cold air around. I don't think there will be, but if there is, we'll be able to see it show up on the short-range models, and that could lead to possibly a similar outcome in terms of the geography impacted, but perhaps a different outcome as far as snow amounts are concerned. What can I tell you? It could be that we're just having a subpar year, and that does happen once in a while. Warren Moore, I look at the winter storm names at 2014, I only see 5 to 8 inch snows in New York City. Well, if you're looking at 13, 14, or 14, well, you might be referring to the Valentine's Day storm Hang on. Let me see. I know Scott did ask me to bring that up. So let me see where it is. Hang on a second. I got to get the right map up, and I do. So let's take a look. And we'll go to the calendar. We're going to go back to Valentine's Day 2014, which was coming on off the winter of 2013-14, which was very bullish indeed. And actually, you can see that must be the end of that storm as it's sitting up in just off of eastern New Brunswick. So let me run back a few maps. There we go. This was a very bullish year for snow in a good chunk of the Northeast. It didn't take much, and what I enjoyed about that particular winter very much was the fact that all of these storms that produced snow, temperatures were never really an issue. In fact, a lot of these storms produced snow with temperatures down under the 20-degree mark. The whole winter was like that. 13, 14, and 14, 15, that was the signature of both those winters. And you don't usually see snowfalls in my neck of the woods anyway. You usually don't see snowfalls along the coast with temperatures in the teens. Most times the temperatures are going to be in the 20s. Usually they'll be in the mid to upper 20s. But that was a nice experience from a meteorological standpoint. But this is the Valentine's Day storm. And if you look closely at some of the temperatures here in 2014, you can see that the numbers here are pretty low. You got low 20s. The New York City ob there is at 23. You've got temperatures in the teens, not that far away. And, it wasn't a particularly strong low, but it was very cold air, good overrunning, and high ratios. And, in fact, we actually did see this thing warm up and change over to sleet and freezing rain. And let's see what happens when it pulls away. And then it changes back to snow before it ends. So, Scott, did I get the date right? Was it 13, 14? I'll bring the map up. I want to make sure. Was it 13 or 14? I think you said it was 14. Valentine's Day 2014. So that was it. Okay, so I did have the right map up. Now I can put it on the screen. Okay, so hang on one second. Oh, God. Here we go. Again, I'm trying to get used to a new spot doing these live streams. So hang on. So here's your surface map. Let me just back this up. You can actually watch the low go backwards. But there's your low that starts off the North Carolina coast as 1,001. You've got temperatures snowing with temperatures in the low 20s here. And it looks like this snowed quite a bit. And then you saw a change over to sleet and freezing rain. And then eventually it just kind of ended as that. Looks like it goes back to snow as the low moves away to the northeast. And New York City got a foot out of this. This was, by the way, this was a perfect example of a winter where you had no blocking whatsoever, okay? The NAO was strongly positive through that whole winter, and the same goes for the winter of 14-15. You had it strongly positive through the whole winter, so I had a few people tell me going into this that, well, you can't have big snowstorms in New York because the NAO is not negative. Stop. You know what kills me about that? That I'm here 5 years later, still having to say that, okay, is insane. Because the same people will continue to throw that argument out the next time it happens that we get a big snow in New York with a positive NAO. They're going to say, you can't have big snow going into it if you're forecasting it. You can't have big snows unless you got a negative NAO. And, they just never learn, okay? I try to make sure that when I get caught with my pants down in a weather forecast situation where I mess up, that I remember why I messed up and that's important. So this way, I don't mess up again, because you don't ever want to, you don't really ever want to make the same mistake twice. Okie dokie. Running through all your comments here. Anybody monitoring Dr. Cohen about that dip in the AO at the end of the month? I haven't got a chance to read his blog recently, so I can't really comment on it. I just wonder if it means that even if that happens, are the other chess pieces going to fall into place? And I think that is a big question. Peter Bicker, it seems like we've been stuck in this rainy pattern since last April. And here's another, you just reminded me of a very interesting point. It was something that Joe Rayo brought up, Peter, is the fact that when you look at New York City records, I don't know if this works for Philadelphia or for Atlantic City's records. It'll be interesting to see if that is the case. But last year, the calendar year, produced 60 inches of rain. And there have been, I think, 8 or 9 instances since 1970 where New York City has produced 60 inches of rain. In the winter that followed that calendar year, so that basically from the December of the end of that calendar year into January, February, and March, in every single one of those cases, New York City had sub-normal snowfall. So that's this will be the 9th time that that's happened. And that is, that's an interesting statistic. If it winds up verifying, we would have to, in order for us to get a normal winter at this point, given the calendar, we are going to have to do it with at least one double-digit snowstorm and a couple of smaller storms in order to get up to that 25 to 30 inch range in New York City. We're only right now at 6, 7, 8.5. So that is a tough thing to do for where we are in the calendar. Just running back on the chat here. See if you guys, Timothy Veltman, that fire hose, fast, flat flow, like the powerful water that comes out of a fire hose. And it doesn't stop. It absolutely doesn't stop. Iron Mine 10, Long Island South Shore, really not that much snow for the whole season. Incredibly, that the November 4-inch storm was the most notable. And it wouldn't be the first time, by the way, that the biggest snowstorm for the season fell in November, and for Long Island. Scott went back, and I should have remembered this, but I wasn't 100% sure, but the Thanksgiving snow of 1989, which was a 7.5-inch snowfall on Long Island, depending on where you measured it, but that was the biggest snowfall of the whole season, believe it or not. It does happen. The parallel GFS, by the way, becomes the operational GFS on the first day of right around the first day of spring, March 20th. Heaven help us when that happens, because that model has been just about god awful. Chris Alley, good to see you. Big hellos to you and big hugs, buddy. Just going back a bit more. I want to make sure I get all your questions and comments. Alfred Phillips up in Wainwright, Alaska, minus 27 degree temperature, wind chill of minus 56. Just another day up in Wainwright, Alaska, on the north north slope on the Arctic, on the shores of the Arctic Ocean, albeit frozen. So let's see. Just trying to. There we go. All right, so it looks like I got most of your questions in today, and that's a good thing. And it's nice to see that you guys are having have the conversations amongst yourselves, talking about all this weather stuff. Earl Warren, a late arrival tonight. Rad chick. Anna Marie Passaretti, nice to see you. Bill Uber's on. Marcio Brown, do you think the Deep South could get snow in March? We had a blizzard in March in '93. Well, that was a different scenario. You're going to have a wholesale change in this weather pattern in order to pull that one off for the early part of March. And as I said earlier, right now, I'm not really seeing anything that points to a big change in the pattern. Don't misunderstand me, by the way. I don't, some people take my position sometimes and kind of twist it to what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that there can't be another snowfall. I'm certainly not saying that there couldn't possibly be a snowfall of size. Of course, there could be. If you get this pattern to relax enough, even for a short period of time, you might be able to sneak one in. All I'm saying is that from what I'm seeing, from what's in front of me, it doesn't appear that that's happening right now. Could I be sitting here tomorrow and say differently? Not likely. Could I be sitting here a week from now and say something differently? Yeah, maybe a week from now. It's possible. But again, just remember that this is all juxtaposed against a clicking clock as we get closer and closer to the end of February and start to move into the month of March. And we know that the atmosphere begins to heat pretty rapidly during the month of March. The normals jump from in New York City, for example, at the beginning of March, the average high is about 44, and by the time you get to the end of March, the average high is at about 56. So that's a big jump, and there's going to have to be a lot of volatility in the atmosphere in order to create a situation like we had last year. So let's call it a night at this point. For those of you who are interested in a more, let's call it, complete weather experience, if you can't get enough of videos, if you can't get enough of weather posts, and you'd like to just read about all of this and be amongst a group of people that are also into the same thing you are, think about subscribing to my Patreon platform. It is a subscription weather platform for just $2 a month, and it does support everything I'm doing, both the videos here and the videos that I do there. I've been putting up instructional videos. I've got a free weather app as well. So the $2 a month is a great way to support my channel. And speaking of the free weather app, it's called Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. It's available on all weather for all mobile devices, be it Android or iPhone. And if you haven't downloaded it already, by all means, please do. Here's the link for that. And by the way, I did on the recent update add a Zoom radar where you could go all over the country and take a look at what's going on the radars, and you could plot temperatures on there, winds, special weather statements, storm reports, etc. So also for your current weather and your local weather conditions and forecasts, you don't have to live where I live. You can just put in your location and it'll bring it up, your local conditions, your local forecast, and the forecast is the Weather Services forecast that's on there. But I think you probably would much rather have that than some of the other stuff that's out there on some other weather apps where they're using weather models that change every 6 hours, especially when it comes to snow. So 1 minute you're forecast to get nothing, and then the next minute you get an update on your app that tells you you're getting half a foot to a foot, only to go, and then it goes to a completely different number 6 hours after that. You don't need that kind of volatility in your app. You want something that's a little more stable, and I think the Weather Service forecasts provide a much better level of stability than some of the other automated apps are, because that's what they are, by the way. They're automated apps. With my app, you get human input in there, because the stuff that I post on my website is also posted to my app, and you get my take on where things are going as far as the weather is concerned, and that's again something you don't see on some of the other apps. And my app is free. The link is it's on the chat board right now, so you can take a look at that, and it's also on the link to my Patreon page is on the descriptor to this live stream, or if you're watching it on a replay, the descriptor to this video. We didn't do a Joe and Joe weather show last night because they were moving our equipment around, so we will try and do one tonight. That'll be at about 9:25 Eastern time, so hope to see you there if you're on Facebook. If not, look for it on my app. The live streams go on the app in case you missed them, so you can always watch them there. Look for it on the app. I'll either have it up late tonight or more than likely first thing tomorrow morning. And if you're on Facebook, it's my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Thanks to all my app users for being on here, because you got your notification that I was doing the live stream tonight. So thanks for being here. Same goes for those of you from Angry Ben's Angry Weather, his Facebook page. And he does my website, nycweathernow.com. And my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. And New York, New Jersey, Connecticut Storm Watch page. Also, the folks from SS Storm Chase and Forecast Team Facebook page for South Central Pennsylvania and North Central Maryland. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.